Maris's voice broke through the clatter of silverware, sharp and trembling. "We mean nothing to you, huh?" Her eyes welled with tears, her hand clutching the edge of the table as if grief alone would keep her upright. Oilia leaned forward, chin tight, lips pursed in judgment. "God, Seraphina, you're cold. A daughter doesn't treat her family this way." Dorian didn't raise his voice. He never did. Instead, he gave that slow, deliberate shake of his head, the kind that always carried more weight than words. The disappointment, in his eyes, felt heavier than the sigh that followed. I sat back in my chair, steadying my breath. For years, I had swallowed moments like this, pretending silence was peace. But tonight, their script unraveled. My hand slid into my bag, fingers closing around the phone I'd tucked there hours earlier. I drew it out and placed it on the table. With deliberate care, Maris sniffled, confusion flashing in her eyes. Oilia's brows drew together in a tight knot. "Trust me," I said softly. "I care." I pressed play. The room shifted. Familiar voices echoed back. Oilia's sharp critiques about my food. Maris's sighs dripping with disdain. Dorian's casual mutters that I should just let it go. The recording filled every corner, a mirror they couldn't escape. Maris's tears vanished as quickly as they had come. Alia's mouth pressed into a thin, brittle line. Dorian's gaze broke, drifting to the floor. I let the silence stretch, then slipped the phone back into my bag. My pulse slowed. Steady now. This wasn't sudden. This had been building for years, and if they wanted to know how I got here, they needed to start where it all began. That memory came, rushing back. It started innocently enough. 10 years ago, I offered to host Thanksgiving in my little Asheville home. I was proud of the place hardwood floors I had refinished myself. A dining room just big enough to stretch out, eatable for 12. I loved filling the air with the scent of rosemary and citrus, hearing laughter spill from the kitchen to the porch. That first holiday, I felt like the glue that held us together. From there, it snowballed. Christmas, Easter, birthdays, even Sunday dinners, when someone didn't feel like cooking. My house was the venue. At first, I told myself it was love. I didn't mind rising at dawn to baste turkeys or stringing lights until my fingers cramped. Seeing everyone gathered around, smiling over a meal I'd poured my energy into felt worth it. But slowly things shifted. The thank yous grew shorter, then disappeared. The hugs at the door turned into quick nods. Instead of asking, they began assuming. A message would come from Maris. "We'll be over for dinner on Sunday." Not a question, just a fact. Oilia arrived with her own spices tucked into her purse, ready to fix my recipes. Dorian always sat in his usual chair, never lifting a hand to help, always reminding me with a glance that I had chosen this role, so I should bear it quietly. Even the moments I tried tour claims suggesting maybe someone else host, or that we go out instead, were brushed aside. "You do it best," Maris would say, with a saccharine smile, as if flattery erased the weight of expectation. Year after year, I carried it, waiting for gratitude that never returned. Love became labor, and labor became duty. By the time another Christmas approached, I was already questioning whether my effort meant anything at all. And that year, I would find my breaking point. It didn't matter what I served. Oilia always found something to needle at. If the soup was too thick, she claimed it lacked refinement. If the bread was crusty, she'd sigh about how her mother's had been softer. Once after I spent hours making a butternut squash risotto, she wrinkled her nose and muttered, "Heavy food. Seraphina, you should think lighter next time." Every word landed like a pinprick, small but sharp enough to sting. Maris had her own way of cutting me down. She didn't criticize outright, at least not with her mother's precision. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, let out a dramatic sigh, and said something like, "Well, I guess this will do." She'd push food around her plate, as if she were enduring punishment, rather than enjoying a meal I had worked all week to plan. Dorian, of course, never defended me. He just sat at the head of the table, shoulders slouched, chewing slowly. If I ever looked to him for support, he would shrug as though my feelings were too trivial to acknowledge. It was his silence that cut deepest, confirming that in his eyes I'd only one purpose: to keep their machine of family gatherings running. Sometimes the table grew even heavier. Adam, a distant cousin, brought friends without warning faces. I didn't. Note-taking seats at my table, helping themselves to food I hadn't prepared with them in mind. The uninvited never apologized. They were simply folded into the evening as if my labor stretched endlessly. Cassie Hall, my neighbor, noticed the rhythm one Sunday when I invited him over for leftovers. "You're too generous, Serafina," he said, watching me pack food into containers. For people who hadn't even thanked me, I laughed it off, insisting it was just family. But his words lingered long after he left, echoing louder with each gathering. The truth was already gnawing at me, even before the Christmas that finally broke me. That December, I tried harder than ever. I told myself that if I could make the evening flawless, maybe it would finally shift something. I spent days planning the menu, choosing each dish with care. A perfectly roasted turkey, citrus-glazed carrots, homemade bread warm from the oven, pies, rolled and crimped by hand. I polished the silverware, pressed the linens, and decorated the tree until it looked like something out of a magazine. Every corner of the house sparkled with effort. When the family arrived, they didn't even glance at the work I had poured myself into. "No thank you." "No wow." "This looks beautiful." Just coats tossed over chairs and complaints about the cold. Oilia's first words were to wrinkle her nose at the mashed potatoes. "You didn't use heavy cream?" she asked, tone sharp as ever. Maris sighed dramatically and slid into her seat. "Guess we'll just have to pretend to like it." "Huh?" She glanced at Dorian, who gave one of his usual non-committal shrugs, the silent approval she always sought. Then, as if the moment needed a final blow, Maris strolled into the kitchen, opened my refrigerator, and pulled out a store-bought pumpkin pie I had picked up as a backup. She held it high like a prize and laughed. "Well, at least this will taste good." Euler chuckled. Dorian's mouth curved into the faintest grin. Even that tiny betrayal felt like a blade. Something inside me cracked. My heart pounded. My hands trembled, but my voice stayed steady. Without a word, I turned off the oven, unfastened my apron, and walked into their living room. I bent down, unplugged the glowing Christmas tree, and watched the lights die in an instant. The room went still. Forks paused in midair. Maris blinked, startled, her smugness faltering. "What are you doing?" she whispered. I looked at her, then at all of them. "I'm done," I said. "I'm not hosting anymore ever." The silence that followed was heavier than all the years of criticism combined, pressing into every corner of the house. And, in that silence, I knew there would be no turning back. The silence after my declaration lasted only a breath before Maris's voice rose again, dripping with false sorrow. "So that's it. We mean nothing to you. After everything, you're just going to walk away." Her tears looked rehearsed, her voice too sharp to be genuine. Oilia gasped, one hand flying to her chest, as if I'd struck her. "How could you say that, Serafina? We're your family. You don't just quit family." Even Dorian, who so often hid behind his silence, finally spoke. Cold, he muttered, shaking his head. How could you be so cold? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. After years of biting remarks, uninvited guests, and endless labor that went unnoticed, I was the one branded unfilling. Their outrage wasn't about losing me. It was about losing their convenience. I straightened, the weight of decisions settling comfortably on my shoulders. You think I don't care? I said evenly. But trust me, I care enough to keep receipts. Their brows knit in confusion. As I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, my thumb tapped the screen, and a familiar chorus filled the room. Oilia's condescending tone. You didn't use heavy cream. Well, that's different. Maris's mocking sigh. I guess we'll just have to pretend to like it. Dorian's careless murmur. Just let it go, Serafina. Each word echoed louder than the last, undeniable and inescapable. The color drained from Maris's face. Oilia's lips pressed so tightly they nearly disappeared. Dorian looked away, eyes fixed on the floor. I let the recording play until the final smug laughter faded. Then any words could have. Weeks passed. Christmas ended without me. And for the first time in a decade, they were set to fend for themselves. I heard pieces of it through whispers that reached me in town. The turkey was undercooked. Maris forgot to defrost the pies. Oilia snapped at Dorian in front of everyone, her voice carrying sharp enough to quiet the table. By New Year's, they were already afraid. Easter was worse. Maris attempted to host, declaring she'd do it better than Serafina ever did. Instead, she burned the ham, overcooked the vegetables, and watched as Oilia tore into her in front of cousins and neighbors. Maris, always dramatic, ended the night in tears, telling everyone she'd never host again. The fractures spread quickly. Oilia took her turn, trying to show she was still the matriarch, who could hold it all together. She forgot to set the table properly, and Dorian muttered about it, within earshot of the guests. Maris mocked her cooking with the same biting tone she once used on me. What once was casual cruelty toward me became weapons. They turned on each other. I didn't lift a finger. I spent those months pouring energy into my work, walking by Thriver in the evenings, even sharing coffee with Cassian now and then. One afternoon, when I told him about the messages I still ignored, he smiled faintly and said, "You taught them respect by absence. Sometimes silence is louder than any fight." And he was right. For once, they were forced to see what life looked like without me holding everything together. It didn't stop them from trying to pull me back in, though. The first attempt came on a grey afternoon when Oilia reached out with an invitation of her own. Oilia chose Asmal Cafe downtown, one of those places with chipped teacups in quiet corners. She was already there when I arrived, stirring her tea with slow, practiced grace. Her smile was too sweet, her eyes sharp as glass. "Thank you for coming," she began, as if I had agreed to something noble. I only nodded, waiting. She wasted no time. I was thinking, maybe you could host Christmas again this year. I know you needed a break, but you've had time now, haven't you? I almost laughed. After everything, she was still framing it as if hosting was a privilege she bestowed on me. "No," I said simply. Her smile froze. A flicker of something ugly crossed her face before she smoothed it over. "Serafina, we're family, and family makes sacrifices. The children always loved coming to your house." Her voice softened on that last part. A needle meant to pierce my heart. I leaned forward. I sacrificed enough. I cooked, cleaned, decorated, and listened to all of you insult me. I don't owe you another holiday. Her lips pressed thin. She muttered something about misunderstanding, then quickly changed the subject, pretending we were just catching up. I let her, but I knew the game wasn't over. That night, Dorian came home pale, asking why I'd been so cruel to her. Apparently, Oilia had called him crying, spinning the meeting into another tale of my coldness. I didn't argue. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the recording I'd made at the cafe, and pressed play. Her own voice filled the room. Family means sacrifice. The children loved your house. Every manipulative note rang clear. Dorian sank into his chair, silent. Oilia's mask had cracked. Again, and yet even stripped bare. She wasn't finished. I knew something was wrong. The moment I pulled into the driveway, Oilia's car sat crooked near the porch. Maris's sedan, pressed close behind it. The blinds in the front window were parted just enough to tell me they'd been watching for me. When I opened their door, the three of them were already seated in my living room, as if they owned it. Maris perched on the edge of the couch, eyes red but defiant. Oilia sat, with her legs crossed, hands folded in her lap like a queen on her throne. Dorian lingered in the armchair, his shoulders heavy, his face unreadable. "We can't keep doing this," Maris started, her voice wavering. "You're punishing us, punishing you." I set my bag down, my voice flat. "For what?" "For having to host your own dinners." Oilia leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "You're tearing this family apart, all because you don't want to do your part anymore." I laughed once, cold and short. My part, for a decade. I carried every holiday, every meal, every insult you threw my way, and now you call it punishment when I stop. Dorian shifted uneasily. "Serafina, please. Can't we just move on from this?" I stood straighter, looking at each of them in turn. "No, I will never host again, ever." The words landed like stones, heavy and final. Maris's mouth fell open, a small gasp escaping. Oilia's composure cracked, her jaw tightening, her fingers gripping her knee. Even Dorian lowered his gaze, the weight of inevitability sinking in. For the first time in years, I felt the balance tip away from their control, and as I looked around my own living room, I realized it was time to claim it for good. The day after their ambush, I walked through my house and saw it differently. The oversized dining table, once stretched to fit every demand, suddenly looked more like a monument to years of exhaustion than a piece of furniture. The cabinets lined with serving platters, and dishes felt less like tools of hospitality, and more like chains that had bound me to a role I no longer wanted. So I began to let go. I called the local donation center and arranged for the platters and extra sets of china to be picked up when Theman carried them out. I felt lighter, as though each piece they removed took a bit of weight off my chest. Then, I listed the dining table for sale. A young couple came to see it, their eyes bright at the thought of hosting their first Thanksgiving. I handed it over, without a second thought, happy to see it belonged to someone who still carried hope, instead of obligation. In its place, I bought a small round table, just enough for 4. On its first night, I invited Cassian and 2 close friends from work. We shared simple food, laughed easily, and lingered long after the plates were cleared. No criticism, no guilt, no unspoken debts. For the first time, joy sat at my table instead of duty. As the night wound down, I realized my home finally reflected me, not the version my family demanded. And in that quiet freedom, I began to see the outline of who I was becoming. But peace once found doesn't mean others stopped trying to steal it. Months passed, and the rhythm of life shifted. The veils stopped calling as often, though their silence carried a bitterness I could almost taste. From neighbors and mutual acquaintances, I heard small pieces of their unraveling. Oilia sulked through gatherings she attempted to host, her perfectionism met with indifference. Maris complained loudly to anyone who would listen, about the burden of responsibility she claimed I had abandoned. Dorian retreated into quiet resignation, fading into the background the same way he always had. Meanwhile, I thrived. My home, stripped of its old demands, became a place of peace. I filled weekends with dinners among friends, evenings walking along the French Broad River, mornings spent in quiet reflection with a book and coffee. The air felt lighter without the constant weight of expectation pressing down on me. Sometimes I thought of the old days, of the decade I had given away to keep their world running smoothly, the laughter I chased, the gratitude I hoped for, the validation that never came. I realized how much of myself I'd set on fire just to keep them warm. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the river in shades of gold, I stopped at the overlook and let the breeze move through me. My life was no longer defined by their demands, their criticisms, or their entitlement. I was free finally, irrevocably free. I spent years burning to keep them warm. I whispered to the water, steady and certain, never again. In the end, is family defined by those who share your name, or those who honor your